Thank you, everybody. Thank you for staying through the lunch. This is a terrific fair. Let's give them another round of applause for all of this focus on mental health. We're going to be talking about depression and how it appears in youth. We'll specifically focus on pediatric bipolar disorder and disruptive mood dysregulation disorder, or DMDD. We will talk about suicide, a symptom of depression, and then we'll pivot to anxiety and how it manifests in our kids and teens. We'll spend some time focusing on how to catch and how to respond to these issues. And then my favorite part, we'll leave lots of time for Q&A at the end. So be thinking of questions that you have now. Okay, so how big is this problem? Let's start right there and get the big picture. I just want to say that this research, I'm going to quote on this slide, was finished in 2020. That does not mean it includes COVID. It means the research was finished up in 2020, so these numbers are likely larger. So that we can see that 17% of our teens meet the criteria for major depressive disorder. 4.1 million adolescents had one or more major depressive episodes. Breaking that down even further, that's over 25% of our females, over 9% of our males, almost 30% of youth from 2 or more races. And then you can see for anxiety disorders, that number is higher. It's almost 32% of teens that are meeting the criteria for an anxiety disorder. Again, breaking that down further, that's 38% of females, over 26% of males. And then you can see with bipolar, that's over 3% of females and 2.6% of males. So these are high numbers for such a serious disorder. And then in the year of the study, 581 young teens committed suicide. This is in 2020. 6,062 older teens and 25 to 9-year-olds committed suicide in that year. So we can see that depression and anxiety affect the gamut of life for children and teens, definitely showing up in peer relationships, in the family, in the school, and really in their very health. Being able to assess and treat these disorders changes developmental trajectories. So we want to be able to understand what we're seeing and to be able to help our youth. And these are issues that are not likely to go away left untreated. Let's dial into depression specifically. You can see that there are mood symptoms, behavior symptoms, vegetative or slowed down symptoms, and thoughts. So for those working with youth, there's an acronym. It's a silly acronym, but we use it to remember, to assess, to ask the different questions. And that acronym is SIGECAPS, SIGECAPS. So the S stands for sleep. We ask youth about insomnia. We ask them about hypersomnia, or, are you sleeping 12, 14 plus hours a day, maybe to avoid. The I in SIGECAPS refers to interest. Is there a decreased interest in activities they previously enjoyed, or is there a loss of pleasure in things that they typically like? The G in SIGECAPS is for guilt. Often this is unrealistic and high. The I stands for energy level, and that encompasses both mental and physical fatigue in these youth. The C in SIGECAPS is for concentration, so look for distraction, look for memory disturbances, look for indecisiveness. That's a definite sign of depression. And then the A, appetite. Is it very up or is it very down? The P stands for psychomotor. So are they very slowed down or very hyper and sped up? And then lastly, the S in SIGECAPS stands for suicide. We must ask depressed youth about thoughts, plans, or behavior regarding suicide, and we'll talk more about that. So let's look at the risk factors. Unfortunately, there are many. Highlighting just a few in here, loneliness. So we know that the Surgeon General last year declared that loneliness is a mental health epidemic. And that's not just for our youth, but certainly for our youth and adults also, nationally. The loneliness was only exacerbated with COVID, with all the social media. But that is certainly a risk factor for depression. Dialing into some of the specific groups, 67% of LGBTQ students, adolescents 13 to 17, report symptoms of depression, and that's certainly significantly higher than adolescents in general. A scary statistic that we learned in the beginning of grad school is that children of depressed parents fare significantly worse than children of schizophrenic parents. So this is an issue that affects our youth. It affects us as human beings growing up in this world at this time, and it's something that we need to catch and we need to treat, whether we're young or not so young, because it has a profound effect on our families and society. Okay, let's talk specifically about pediatric bipolar disorder. So this is where we see a great unstableness in mood, more pronounced than regular adolescent years. What are regular adolescent years? But the mood instability is much more pronounced, and it usually comes with reckless, impulsive behavior, and sometimes aggression. So bipolar, just to think about it simply, it's both sides. It's the mania, which we can see is euphoric or irritable. I'm going to highlight irritable through the day, because a lot of times when we're thinking about depression and related disorders, we look for sadness. But irritability, especially youth that are waking and irritable through the day, most every day, that could be depression. In the teenage years, it can look more like irritability than sadness for some. So the mania, the euphoria, the irritability. These are kids, they'll tell me, oh, I got like 3 or 4 hours of sleep last night, but I was fine. So that decreased need for sleep, seeming to do well or be very animated on small amounts of sleep. A grandiosity, hypersexuality, increased activity levels, starting a lot of things but finishing nothing, and then racing thoughts. So that's the mania side, and then the depression as we described earlier. Talking a little bit further, with youth, we see more mixed or rapid cycling between the mania and between the depression. So often much faster than occurs in adults. We know that in 2022, that almost 3% of teens were diagnosed with bipolar disorder. This is, unfortunately, a disorder that's often misdiagnosed. It often takes a while. Parents, school professionals see there's a problem, but it takes a while to tease out whether it is pediatric bipolar or ADHD or oppositional defiant disorder or just depression. And let me just clarify, when I say pediatric bipolar, I'm talking like your pediatrician that you see from 0 to 18 with your kids. So I'm talking children and teens. And then let's talk about a newer diagnosis in this general category, disruptive mood dysregulation disorder, or DMDD. Let's just jump right down to the end of the slide. This is most commonly diagnosed in children in that 6 to 10 range at first being diagnosed. But these are severe temper outbursts that occur at least 3 or more times a week, and they're severe in intensity as compared to other behavioral shifts with kids. These kids are chronically irritable, so their default mood is irritability. And they have trouble functioning in multiple settings. So you see trouble in the home, they're struggling at school, they're not doing great with peers. Okay, and then let's talk about suicide, because suicide is a symptom of major depressive disorder. Nearly 20% of high school students reported serious thoughts of this in 2022. That rate is certainly higher than students that endorsed on a questionnaire, but it's a figure to start with. We certainly know that the rate is higher for different groups. For example, LGBTQ individuals, teenagers, 48% in that 13 to 17 range have reported serious thoughts of suicide. This is in the research that was culminated in 2022. The troubling thing about this symptom is that acts are also impulsive in nature. So when you're crossing that with adolescence and all the change, all the intensity, all the moods, not realizing that those moods ebb and flow, you see the danger. So let's look specifically at warning signs. Any kind of communication about suicide is a warning sign. Joking, texting, any kind of writing, any communication about it at all is something that needs to be talked about and assessed further. Giving away prized possessions, making final arrangements, other depressive symptoms. Pay attention to the fifth one here, a sudden, unexplained recovery from depressive symptoms. Often this can be in youth and adults that they're finally deciding or having enough energy to act on suicidal plans. So please watch closely. And then marked feelings of helplessness or hopelessness. Continuing here, risk-taking behavior, not caring about risk. Self-injury sometimes, most of self-injury is not suicidal in nature, however, accidents do occur. Having any type of plan or a significant behavioral change that you see, a previous suicide attempt in the youth, or being exposed to loss, a family member that's committed suicide, a classmate, those are large warning signs. And then any kind of substance use. Again, substances lowering the frontal lobe, encouraging reckless behavior, impulsive behavior. Certainly any kind of mental illness. We just talked about bipolar disorder. The stats are much higher for youth that meet that criteria of considering suicide. You see the social struggle, the hopelessness piece, being alienated, being bullied, not feeling like you have a voice, not feeling like you're seen. And we'll talk more about that shortly. I like to think about this issue and really most psychological disorders in the lens of a diathesis stress model. So we may be predisposed to certain difficulties, certain mental illness, certain struggles, but it's not until the stressor is present that dormant predisposition combines with the stressor, and then you see the outward symptoms. Okay, so looking at depression as a whole, with all of its symptoms, I want to transition us to anxiety and its common thread with depression in youth. So they're believed to stem from the same biological vulnerability. One can make the other worse. For example, you can be anxious so long that you become depressed. Makes sense, right? So it's possible to have both. Look for both. Okay, so talking about anxiety, anxiety is currently, and actually has been for a while, the most common mental health issue. It's surpassed depression. It's almost doubled the rate of depression, as you heard in the earlier stats. Again, for certain groups, 73% of LGBTQ youth report symptoms of anxiety, as opposed to 32% of other youth, or youth as a whole. And there's all sorts of labeled anxieties, from separation anxiety in young children, specific phobias, afraid of the dark, afraid of throwing up, like specific things you're afraid of, through generalized anxiety or having a lot of worries about different things. I'm worried about my schoolwork. I'm worried about my parents' finances. I'm worried about my parents. So having a multitude of worries is generalized anxiety. OCD starts to rear in middle childhood, and that, although it doesn't fit in the category anymore of anxiety disorders, there's a lot of commonness, and a lot of the treatments are effective with both anxiety and obsessive compulsive disorder. Social anxiety really comes to the fore. We've seen a lot more social anxiety or social phobia post-COVID because our youth didn't have the experience to learn those skills. They're not, they haven't had the time and the exposure to work through the discomfort there. And then panic disorder. Panic, we usually see more in like tweens and up, just to give you kind of a developmental flavor. But there's not, it's not to say that a child couldn't experience any one of these, or that older teens might not experience separation anxiety in certain situations. Often, it's our most smart kids that are the most anxious because they can think, what are the things to be worried about? Like, what if this and what if that? And they're so smart that they can go much further than their developmental level can support with their questionings. So don't buy into the statement that anxiety is just a phase. It will get better, it will go away, they'll get stronger, they'll get more confident. Anxiety usually worsens over time if left untreated. It's internal, just like depression. It often goes under the radar, and kids miss out on important developmental stages. You can see it affects academics, it affects social. It can lead to substance use, especially when there's effective ways to manage it. Don't miss this. Don't wait this out. And then let's talk specifically about how anxiety comes across in youth. So you can see that there are thinking and feeling symptoms which lead to behavioral symptoms such as avoidance. I'm avoiding things that I'm afraid of. Identifying a struggling youth is an important job of parents, of school professionals, of coaches, of community members. This is something where it's best caught early so that we can change developmental trajectories. Again, we have the irritability. I forgot to highlight this time, but irritability, anger, anxiety, or really any of these issues can come out as anger because that's a stronger emotion and we feel more in control when we're angry, so don't be deceived by that. There certainly could be, and I'm sure you know in your own families, anxiety at the core of that explosion or temper tantrum or irritability. Okay, so let's talk about the physical symptoms of anxiety in kids and teens. You can see that there are many. And that's because the mind-body barrier in our youth is so slim. Things roll over into the physical. They don't necessarily always have the vocabulary or the experience to realize it's an emotional issue, and so it rolls right to the physical. So school nurses, you see these symptoms. Parents, you hear these, my stomach hurts, I can't go to school. Be thinking, is something going on deeper than that? And then please watch for other struggles that go on. We know that it's very common for more than one mental health issue to be happening at the same time in youth. We know this from research. It could be another anxiety disorder, depression, eating disorders, sleep disorders, substance use, ADHD. I could keep on going, but other things run commonly with anxiety. So look for other issues that may be present. Okay, so let's talk about how these issues develop. So a little distressing to see this, but let me break this down for us so it makes sense and is usable for us. So there's some genetic involvement in anxiety. What is usually inherited is the degree of emotional arousal with anxiety. So kids are predisposed to react more to situations, and then that plays out in behavior. Secondly, our thinking style. So if we're telling ourselves the worst is going to happen, if we're thinking of the worst, that is certainly going to play a role. We say this commonly, but honestly, I probably hear this once a week. An anxious student is walking through the hall, and they're walking past some lockers, and a bunch of kids laugh. And that anxious student is thinking, they are laughing at me. So it's our anxiety, it's our thinking style that stokes and just grows the anxiety. Third, avoidance. Anything that we avoid grows stronger. So if you're nervous about something and you stay away from it, you don't have the chance to develop the skills. You don't have the chance to try and fail and get up again. Avoidance grows anxiety. And then a specific note here with reassurance seeking. Our anxious children and teens pull for heavy reassurance from families, from parents, from teachers, from school social workers and other professionals. They are so anxious that they want you to manage that for them, and they grow very good at eliciting that reassurance from us. The problem is, if we are giving them the reassurance all the time, they haven't developed it themselves internally. So they don't have that confidence. They're not facing something and learning. They are dependent on outside people. And those of you who have children that do this, you know how grating, how exhausting that is as a parent. Because, parents, we want to keep our kids safe. We want to see them do well. And if they pull for this anxiety, we can get stuck in a loop where we keep supplying it, again, preventing the youth from learning to face their fears and therefore overcome. And then environment, certainly kids that grow up, like if a parent is nervous about driving on the tollway and they white knuckle it every time they get on 88, that child is observing that for years, and they're going to grow up thinking that the tollway is dangerous. So what kids are exposed to, certainly their environment affects. Let me just say a word. For those of you that were here this morning for the first presentation, I promise you we did not swap notes, but we did look at the same research. We know that, we know our culture, we know our area involves a lot of helicopter or lawnmower type of parenting. We want to make things go well for our kids. We want to smooth things over. We want to help them. And there's nothing wrong with that desire as parents. It is good to want the best for your kids. It's good to love and to try to parent to the best of your ability. The problem is, if we're always smoothing things over, as we said earlier, it affects their competence and their confidence. If you think about a baby chick in an egg, if somebody were to crack that egg to allow the chick to come out sooner or easier, what would happen to that little chick? That chick would not develop the strength to fly and would eventually die. And so in a parallel, in a different way, research has shown repeatedly that we need expectations for our kids, but we also need love, and that includes standing by and letting them make mistakes, letting them fail, get back up and go at it again and again and again. Those are the secrets to competence and confidence, and we need to encourage that in our children. And then certainly any kind of abuse or trauma early creates vulnerability for mental health issues later. All right, so talking about all of the social changes that our kids are going through, the myriad at this age, in this time, we can see that as their brains develop, it brings change in how they interact with peers. And I don't know about you, but I wouldn't want to be growing up right now and having to track all of the social media, right? All of the texts, all of the different communication, all of the nuances. In COVID, having to, decipher between like a smile and it is so difficult. And this is all happening for them at ages where they're still developing. As you've probably heard all day, right? It's 25 plus that it takes those many years for our frontal lobe to fully develop. So the social changes are coming at a very difficult time for them. COVID, again, being so hard because kids weren't in person to see and to learn all of these nuances. And they missed out on the social connectedness. We know that's a cause for loneliness. We know that the longer a child is lonely, the more significant the mental health issues are later. So we have this need for social connectedness. But social media is just a false and addictive substitute for being in person, for being able to talk and see and engage all of our senses and being able to relate. This is what we were made for, and we know that the more social media use, the higher the rates of depression, the higher the rates of anxiety, the higher self-injury, and the higher suicide. And we know that those links are even more prominent for females. Okay, and then backdrop of our own society's obsession with how we look on the outside, with gender, with, as we've talked about today, and I'm sure you talk about regularly, just the focus on the college resume or the sports and the teams and the things. Perfectionism is at an all-time high. So all of these things going on, again, at tender developmental ages. And then, of course, our youth are stressed by all the things that we're stressed about. The problem is they don't have the backlog. They haven't gone through 9/11 like most of us have. They haven't developed the coping skills that we've had to develop or we've really had to lean into the last few years. So there's no history to draw from. At the same time that they're being exposed to things all over the world instantly, and they don't have the developmental capacities to handle that. And they don't have the long-term thinking to be able to see, wow, I feel really anxious today, or I'm really upset, or I'm so troubled by what my friend did today, but I might not feel like that tomorrow or in the future. So we can see why these times are so stressful. So what can we do? We can all start with things that we can manage. And these are things that you've thought of before. These are things that you're probably doing, but let's unpack further what we can do here. So physical activity, we know. Physical activity, regular exercise, is equivalent to therapy for mild to moderate depression or anxiety. So if you have a kid that's mild to moderately anxious or depressed, this is a go-to. This is something we talk about every day. And it doesn't have to be the same kind of exercise, the same kind of outlet you do. Really, anything. If I'm in a pinch for time and I'm really stressed about something, I'm going to run the stairs. Because I've learned, for me, that's the fastest way to dump the adrenaline in my anxious body and get me back into a more functioning level where I can use a variety of tools. Or we talk with kids about at school, like, can you go into the bathroom, like use the handicap bathroom and run in place with your knees high? It takes like 30 seconds, but you will feel better. Can you go for a long, vigorous walk? Can you drop and do push-ups? Like, I can do like 4, and then I'm exhausted, and honestly, then it's burned a bunch of adrenaline off. So what are ways to be active? And especially active outdoors, active in nature, sunlight, being outside. And then we know sleep. So we talked in the earlier session, and it's true, the 2 things that were great during COVID, the 2 things that research shown that improved during COVID for our youth, are they slept more and they ate more family dinners. So sleep is crucial at this age. Poor sleep has a compounding effect on our youth. Screens right before bed slows sleep onset and sleep quality. I talk with kids and families about going old school, separating the phone from the alarm clock. So you can still buy an old school alarm clock online. You probably can't get it in the store anymore. But really, think about it. Like, this is the world at your fingertips. Do you really want this in your child's room overnight? Would you let them have a boyfriend or girlfriend stay over door shut overnight. And teens will push back, because they always do, and it's great. They'll say, well, I need to be available for my friends in case they have a crisis in the middle of the night. Really? No. You need sleep. Your friend needs help, but you need your sleep. Yeah. So eating real food, again, seeing people in person. People tell me, I see myself, I see this in my own kids, whenever they're around people in person, and there's a place for gaming, and there's a place for chat, and there's certainly a place for being connected, but there's not a substitute for the in-person stuff too. So I know that kids, and frankly, us as adults, do better when we can see people in person. Research I pulled from last month talking about the different ways that social media promotes loneliness rather than connection. Repeated studies are showing that screen activities are linked to more loneliness, no surprise, and non-screen activities are linked to less loneliness. So that true connection that involves eye contact and touch and just being genuinely interested in another person, as I talked about before, is crucial. Relationships take work. We all know this in our own lives. They take more work than ever. You've got to be willing to get the no's and to get the busy and to get the distracted. You know this in your friends, but they're crucial for your kids and teens. We will, as a society, remain lonely and empty if we don't figure this out, how to get in-person physical relationships in our lives. And remind your kids that it is difficult. You empathize with them, but the work pays off. And you still, as parents, have the highest influence on your children, even in the teenage years. So use that influence, because this really matters. Okay, so let's talk about what to do when the basics aren't enough. So there's two questions to ask. Is what you're seeing in your child, in your student, in your neighbor, in your student on your sports team or activity or whatever, is what you're seeing in front of you, are they not able to do what they need to do or what they want to do? Are their feelings keeping them from making friends and doing things that they used to enjoy? And help is available. Help's available in the family and at school and from coaches and neighbors and your house of worship and the community and books and psychologists. So here are things that we can do. First of all, talk to your child or teen. Continue the conversation with them. And if you're in a school setting, raise your concerns to the parent or guardian. We want to make sure there's nothing physical going on, there's no hypothyroidism or some physical issue that's showing you these symptoms. The school social worker is a wonderful resource for crisis work in the school, for groups, for social groups. But outside the school, a child and adolescent psychologist or therapist can be your friend. This is a good number to have in your phone, 988, the Suicide and Crisis Hotline. You can call that number, you can text that number. It's 24 hours, it's confidential. And then, of course, the hospital or 911 in an immediate crisis. So let's talk about therapeutically, quickly, some things that we do. So certainly for a depressed or anxious child or teen, individual therapy is usually in the cards, and that's a mixture. It's one or maybe a combination of these. Cognitive behavioral therapy, you might have heard of CBT, acceptance and commitment therapy, or DBT. It didn't make the slide. DBT, or dialectical behavior therapy, and mindfulness. Those are skills that we draw from in combination or singly. And then also, we do a lot of work with parents, especially of children. You as parents are seeing your child in all the different environments. You're seeing them in the home. You're seeing them with friends in the community. You are hearing reports from school. You might be seeing them in outside activities. So giving you resources is time well spent to help your youth. We do family therapy. Group therapy is also a wonderful thing to consider. In the case of a group, you get to see that you are not alone, that other people feel similarly. You get to learn skills, practical ways to combat how you feel, and you get support, live coaching right there at the time. So that's a nice option. There's we run a variety of groups at the practice, but just a shout out for one. We found, especially with social anxiety and social nervousness kind of situations, we run an improv group for tweens and then another one for high schoolers. So group therapy doesn't have to be like group therapy, like you might have thought about it maybe growing up, like a heavy-handed support group. But it can be fun, game-based, activity-based, and still provide the skills for our youth. And then certainly testing, if you think there's some issue going on underneath that you are not sure you have a handle on, psychological or neuropsychological testing, or medication or psychiatry in concert with therapy, especially for some of the more difficult issues, the more severe anxiety and depression, bipolar, those types of concerns. But let me give you some self-help. So these are easily accessible resources for you. The first one, The Happiness Trap, great book, came out by Russ Harris several years ago. His website is chock full of free resources for you. Handouts. There is a 8-week course that you can pay for, but there's lots of freebies on that website. The Happiness Trap as a book is a wonderful book to read, but let's skip down to the very end. So I had The Happiness Trap. It's like, I got it when it was hardcover. It's great. I use it all the time. But I bought the illustrated Happiness Trap, which is like a graphic novel for my nephew. And I like read it first over the weekend before I gave it to him. It's fabulous. It has all the skills, but it's a graphic novel, so it's really accessible. Honestly, as an adult, I enjoyed it. So if you're thinking of buying that book, check out the illustrated one first. And then the other two, the Beyond the Blues is for teens, as well as Mind Over Mood. So those are all, on this page, those are all teen resources, and then the website also. And then for anxiety, so self-help for anxiety. So Worry Wise Kids, beautiful website, lots of things, red flags, scripts for talking to kids at different developmental ages about anxiety, scripts for talking with siblings about a sibling that has anxiety. So that's a great site, both for professionals and families alike. And then you can see there's some books here. The first is for parents or helping professionals. The second is for teens. And then the last is for adults. Thank you very much.